Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello, my name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 90 in regular counting. We are 10 episodes away from our big 100th show with our no longer semi-regular co-host. Now he's just the co-host, Tom Libby. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing fantastic, Jesan. Thank you. I love the new introduction. It's so much better.
Well, you're no longer semi-regular. You're no longer just wandering in off the street.
I'm just a fixture now.
Now you're just a fixture. Now you're just a fixture on the wall. Yeah, exactly. Like the posters behind me in the video of this podcast that you can't see if you're listening to the audio. And you should be watching the video on YouTube, by the way. So today, we are going to open up. This is now January of 2024. So I'm going to timestamp date this podcast right here. This is January 8th of 2024. And we're going to open our big election year and everything else that's going to be going on during 2024 with a book that focuses us as listeners and as readers and as leaders on the Platonic roots of the democratic ideals about justice, leadership, character, and society that have built the West and that have heavily influenced America. So heavily influenced America and so heavily influenced thinking about America that we don't even think about this book anymore. It's one of those books, kind of like Shakespeare or the Bible, that we just sort of accept as being part of the general conversation. Those ideals and their impact on Western leaders' conceptions of themselves and their place in the chaotic now of algorithms, public distrust of leadership, and the growing sense that the quote-unquote high watermark of the destructive fourth turning in America, and I'll explain more about that as we go along, may be behind us in the United States, also are going to be the focus of our conversation today. So today, we will be reading selections from the Republic of Plato. Now, I'm not going to go into the authorship of the book because I don't really need to. It actually stands alone, and you can find many open source versions of the Republic of Plato online. It has been studied and read for the last 2,500 years, ever since it was published by Plato, who was a student of the philosopher Socrates. And it is a Socratic perspective on a whole lot of things. And we're going to cover a lot of those, or many of those, today. Now, we will not be reading the whole book because we can't. There's just no possible way to do that. And so we will be reading selections from that, and we will be getting Tom's insights on the Republic of Plato, a book that he did not read in college, I believe. Is that correct?
That is correct. I've read excerpts of it throughout my expanded life, but it's expansive. I don't know whether I'm right, but I have read excerpts of it, but I've not read it cover to cover. No.
Okay. Well, fortunately for Tom, I read it cover to cover in college, and the book, I won't say it deeply influenced me, but it did definitely help me make sense of many things that I saw in the culture and in society, and some of the chaos that, some of the chaos that I was observing when I was in college 20 years ago. And it is also a book, and this is going to be part of the focus of our podcast this year. It is a book that lays the foundation for us to be able to begin to talk about solutions rather than constantly noodling and philosophizing on the nature of problems, which I do believe we've done quite enough of that. So I'm going to go ahead and open from the Republic of Plato, the translation that I have. And again, you can go pick up any translation floating around out there. All of them will be basically the same. And of course, there are open source translations all over the internet that you can go and get. And so I'm going to open up with chapter 6 in the Republic, where Socrates is laying out his perspective on the rudiments of social organization. So we're going to start there today. Now, the way that this book is structured, and I was explaining this to Tom when before I hit the record button, is this book is structured as a conversation, right? So one person is talking to another person, and traditionally the way a philosophical argument is constructed when one person is talking to another, there are no quotations. It's not dramatized. It's not Shakespeare. It's a philosophical or a Socratic conversation between two folks. So I want you to imagine, as you listen to this in the theater of your mind, I want you to imagine two individuals in ancient Greek robes sitting on top of a hill, talking to each other.
Was it supposed to be assumed that Plato himself was talking to Socrates in this? I saw that somewhere, that it was supposed to be like that you were supposed to make that assumption as you read it. Is that something that you felt the same? Okay, all right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and or at the very minimum that Plato was sitting at Socrates' feet as he was going back and forth with all these folks, eavesdropping on the conversation. Right.
Got it. Yeah.
And so the way in which this book is structured like that, and so the excerpts are going to reflect that as we go today. All right, so I'm going to open up with Socrates speaking to a fellow named Glaucon, right, in chapter 6, on the rudiments of social organization. I will tell you, we think of justice as a quality that may exist in a whole community, as well as in an individual, and the community is the bigger of the two. Possibly then we may find justice there in larger proportions, easier to make out. So I suggest that we should begin by inquiring what justice means in a state. Then we can go to look for its counterpart on a smaller scale in the individual. That seems like a good plan, he agreed. Well, then, I continued, the I meaning Socrates, suppose we imagine a state coming into being before our eyes. We might then be able to watch the growth of justice or of injustice within it. When that is done, we may hope it will be easier to find what we are looking for. Much easier. Shall we try then to carry out this scheme? I fancy it will be no light undertaking, so you had better think twice. No need for that, said Adeimantus. Don't waste any more time. My notion is, said I, that a state comes into existence because no individual is self-sufficing. We all have many needs, but perhaps you can suggest some different origin for the foundation of a community. No, I agree with you. So having all these needs, we call in one another's help to satisfy our various requirements. And when we have collected a number of helpers and associates to live together in one place, we call that settlement a state. Yes. So if one man gives another what he has to give in exchange for what he can get, it is because each finds that to do so is for his own advantage. Certainly. By the way, pause. This is exactly how sales works, even 2,500 years ago. Back to the book. Certainly. Very well, said I. Now let us build upon our imaginary state from the beginning. Apparently, it will owe its existence to our needs, the first and greatest need being the provision of food to keep us alive. Next, we'll want a house, and thirdly, such things as clothing. True. How will our state be able to supply all of these demands? We shall need at least one man to be a farmer, another a builder, and a third a weaver. Will that do, or shall we add a shoemaker and one or two more to provide for our personal wants? By all means. The minimum state then will consist of 4 or 5 men. Apparently. Now here's the further point. Is each one of them to bring the product of his work into a common stock? Should our one farmer, for example, provide food enough for 4 people and spend the whole of his working time in producing corn so as to share with the rest? Or should he take no notice of them and spend only a quarter of his time on growing just enough corn for himself and dividing the other 3/4 between building his house, weaving his clothes, and making his shoes so as to save the trouble of sharing with others and attend himself to all his own concerns? The first plan might be easier, replied Adeimantus. That may very well be so, said I, for as you spoke, it occurred to me, for one thing, that no two people are born exactly alike. There are innate differences which fit them for different occupations. I agree. And will a man do better working at many trades or keeping to one only? Keeping to one. And there is another point. Obviously, work may be ruined. If you let the right time go by, the workman must wait upon the work. It will not wait upon his leisure and allow itself to be done in a spare moment. So the conclusion is that more things will be produced and the work will be more easily and better done when every man is set free from all other occupations to do at the right time the one thing for which he is naturally fitted. Well, that is certainly true. So we shall need more than 4 citizens then to supply all those necessities we mentioned. You see, Adeimantus, if the farmer is to have a good plow and spade and other tools, he will not make them himself. No more will the builder and weaver and shoemaker make all the implements they need. So quite a number of carpenters and smiths and other craftsmen must be enlisted. Our miniature state is beginning to grow. It is. Still, it would not be very large, even when we have added cowherds and shepherds to provide for the farmers with oxen for the plow, and the builders as well as the farmers with the draught animals, and the weavers and shoemakers with wool and leather. No, but it will not be very small either. And yet, again, it will be next to impossible to plant our city in a territory where it will need no imports. So there will have to be still another set of people to fetch what it needs from other countries. There will. Moreover, if these agents take with them nothing that those other countries require, they will return as empty-handed as they went. So besides everything wanted for consumption at home, we must produce enough goods of the right kind for the foreigners whom we depend on to supply us. That will mean increasing the number of farmers and craftsmen. Yes. And then there are these agents who are to import and export all kinds of goods, merchants, we call them. We must have them. And if they are to do business overseas, we shall need quite a number of ship owners and others who know about that branch of trading. We shall. Again, in the city itself, how are the various sets of producers to exchange their products? That was our object, you will remember, in forming a community, and so laying the foundation of our state. Obviously, they must buy and sell. That will mean having a marketplace and a currency to serve as token for purposes of exchange. Certainly. Now, suppose a farmer or an artisan brings some of his produce to market at a time when no one is there who wants to exchange with him. Is he there to sit idle when he might be at work? No, he replied. There are people who have seen an opening here for their services. In well-ordered communities, they are generally men not strong enough to be of use in any other occupation. They have to stay where they are in the marketplace and take goods for money from those who want to sell, and money for goods from those who want to buy. That, then, is the reason why our city must include a class of shopkeepers. So we call these people who sit still in the marketplace to buy and sell, in contrast with merchants who travel to other countries. Quite so. There are also the services of yet another class, who have the physical strength for heavy work, though on intellectual grounds they are hardly worth including in our society. Hired laborers, as we call them, because they sell the use of their strength for wages. They will go to make up our population. Yes. Well, Adeimantus, how is our state now grown to its full size? Perhaps. Then wherein it shall we find justice or injustice? If they have come in with one of the elements we have been considering, can you say which one? I have no idea, Socrates, unless it be somewhere in their dealings with one another. You may be right, I answered. Anyhow, it is a question which we shall have to face. And it's a question we've been facing for the last 2,500 years, ever since Socrates ran that thought experiment on Adeimantus and Glaucon sitting outside underneath a tree. We haven't gotten any better, folks. And this is the irony of the Republic of Plato. The arguments that roil our society and roil our culture, arguments around, and this is why I started with justice or injustice, but really begin with the formation of the state, really begin with our human struggle on what does justice actually mean, which is why the Republic starts with this concept of justice, moves backward to the state, and then moves forward, as we are going to move forward today, towards what type of man, and it was all men, sorry, ladies, what type of man will be in charge of the state. We're going to talk about that. Because those ideas, what type of man, who's going to be in charge of the state, what is the state comprised of, and of course, what is justice and injustice, have been bedeviling us as human beings, but most notoriously been bedeviling us in the West for the last 2,500 years. And of course, Albert Einstein said notoriously upon the creation of the atomic bomb, that the solution to this problem lies not in the atom and not in technology or science, but in the human heart, which is something that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were all groping towards, but couldn't quite grasp. Not until somebody else came along a little bit later. But I'll leave that aside for just a moment. So, Tom, I'm going to open up the election year of 2024 with what is the state, what is justice, what is injustice, what is virtue and knowledge, how do we locate this in people? And so I'm going to go all Socratic on you here. And I'm going to propose that we on the podcast today, we develop a state. But of course, it will have old human problems with new technological chaos in it.
I think one of my favorite one of the few excerpts and one of the favorites I read, like, when Socrates was asking, I forget who it was asked, but actually I think he asked several people. I don't think this was one conversation with one person, but like, before you do all of that, can you, like, because essentially this is predicated on justice or injustice, right? Most of this is all predicated on. So he asks people to define it, right? So define justice. And it was every time somebody came to him with an answer that they thought was sufficient, he would rip it apart, right? Like, he would rip it and say, that can't be defined as justice because of this and this, and you have that and that. And again, I can't quote it, so I don't know the verbatims, but I will tell you they're in there, and I can't remember. But so how do we go forward with even having this conversation if we don't even know what that definition is first, right? So one of the things that I think back to a statement that a lawyer, an attorney, said to me one time, going through, we'll just call it a negotiative state in the legal field, right? And he said to me, there's only two outcomes you can ask for. Anything else is unfair, right? So he said, either both parties are unhappy or both parties are very happy. Anything else means that it didn't work, right? So I try to think of that in the same, like, cadence as what Socrates was talking about justice. And so if you think about it's essentially agreed upon fairness, right? Like, so something, justice is basically a predetermined set of fairnessness, so to speak, right? So, you know, I bring, you think about what he was talking about with the start of his state, where I'm going to be a farmer. I have all these crops. I have enough crops to feed my family now. I have this leftover. I can trade them away. And as long as I'm happy with what I get in return, that's fair and just, right? But it's not for you to decide what's fair and just. It's for the two parties involved to decide what's fair and just. So it's all very individualistic. It is. Which, by the way, is one of the knocks that I hear when people start talking about socialism in our current government and world in country, right? Like, we want all this socialism, but if justice and fairness is determined between the two parties at hand, then how can you expect the entire village or the entire state to be okay with the same justice that you're okay with? That's why it doesn't work, right? That's why we haven't been able to figure this out yet. And by the way, the same rule applies if you're talking about the two parties being myself and the state government, or myself and the local government, or myself and the police officer that just pulled me over. It's the two, whatever the two parties are defined as, but that doesn't go outside of that conversation and those two parties.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I interact with our government and the way that you interact with our government are two different things.
Right.
So how do your definition of justice and mine? That's why Socrates could never get the real answer from anybody.
Right. Well, and that's why also he was
so different to everybody.
He was notorious for walking around saying that, well, not notorious, but claiming that he knew nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, Plato and subsequently Aristotle, mostly Plato, we'll lay this at the feet of Plato. Plato, defined that as a species of wisdom, which we're going to talk about today also on the podcast, right? How do you get to wisdom? Because the idea that there is a definitive answer to these questions doesn't exist. And yet, and this is the other irony, Socrates was put on trial and took the hemlock. By the way, volunteered to take the hemlock because he was considered to be a gadfly among the young who was disrupting the state by walking around claiming he didn't know and asking a bunch of prodding questions that drove people crazy. And by the way, you pick up some of that tension in the Republic. You pick up some of that tension where people, particularly Glaucon, at the beginning of the first few chapters, is very frustrated with Socrates constantly poking him and asking him basically variations of the same question in order to get to clarity.
This reminds me, if anybody has ever raised a kid, this is the 3-year-old.
This is 3-year-old.
Hey, don't touch that. Why? Well, because you're going to get hurt if you touch that. Well, why? Well, because the knife is sharp. Well, why? Because we need sharp knives. Why? Like that's infuriating, right? This is Socrates was a 3-year-old.
And he'd probably be okay with that, actually. You're right. Exactly. He'd be like, yeah, you're exactly right. Well, and when you think about sort of his dialogic way of talking, the Socratic method, right? His way of teaching through questioning. That is something that, quite frankly, a lot of people struggle with. I think there was a rare moment in the West, and I would maybe put it in the era of Victorian England, maybe, where that was actually sort of accepted and sort of viewed as an erudite way of learning or an erudite way of thinking. But that's all gone. That's as dead and as gone as the Victorians are. And we have returned to the mean. And the mean is, don't ask me questions, just accept the answer. But when I give you the answer for what justice is, don't ask me any questions.
Yeah.
Or on the opposite, when I defined what injustice is, don't you dare question me.
Yeah. It's that I just had the like, your opinion is what I say it is, like that kind of scenario. That's like I remember with my uncle. It was basically my uncle's definition of the military. Right, when he went into the military, he goes, I said, what's it like being in the military? He goes, what's it like being in the military? It's very simple. They tell you your opinion and you agree to it. That's it.
Well, it is the whole idea of even just doing, and it is the thing that befuddles folks sometimes about this podcast. It's the whole thing about thinking, right? And I kind of opened up with saying, we're not going to continue to philosophize about the nature of problems, and we're not, because I do think that at a certain point, to paraphrase from Cillian Murphy as Robert Oppenheimer in Christopher Nolan's great film Oppenheimer, at a certain point, you do have to move from theory to practice.
Who just won a Golden Globe, by the way.
Yes, I did see that. but that doesn't bode well for the future. I don't think he's going to win an Oscar, because people win Golden Globe, when movies win Golden Globes, they don't win Oscars. They don't win Oscars. It's going to be the Barbie movie or some nonsense. Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that while you have a lot of words, we have a modern. I actually said this today in a different context to a bunch of different people. We've had 30 years of an explosion of words digitally, just the number of words that have been thrust into the cultural zeitgeist, not just in America, but globally, has exploded. It's been ridiculous. But I'm not sure that those words mean anything. And that's the thing you kind of get to when you read Socrates. Because at a certain point, and by the way, you also get there when you read the Bible or when you read Shakespeare, right? When you read these cornerstone books of Western thinking, you get to this idea that maybe all the talking that's going on is meaningless noise. Mm. And maybe that would have been something that Socrates would have been frustrated with as well. Because are you truly getting to any insights here? Or are you just blabbing to blab?
I mean, we as a species just enjoy to hear ourselves talk. So I think you're just blabbing to blab. Like, I think that you're right. But that's par for the course when it comes to humanity. Like, but most people just like right now. I'm not letting you interrupt me because I just like hearing. No, I'm just kidding. Like, but in reality, it is like a human thing, right? Like, you like, even people. I introverts, people who don't like to interact with other people. But if you are one-on-one with them and you ask them a question, they'll run off for quite a while talking about whatever they want to talk about.
I picked up a book over the holidays, and we'll go back to the book here in a minute. We'll go back to the Republic in a minute here. But I picked up a book over the holidays called The Art of Listening. It's a sales book. Okay. Yes. And the structure of the book, it's written from the perspective of an automotive sales person, right? Who's a car dealer, basically. And it's a book that's teaching car dealers how to listen rather than talk. And weirdly enough, it was written a couple of years ago, but it seems like it was written for an audience in the 1950s.
Yeah.
So I don't know what's going on there. But the author emphasizes that if you listen to people, you will be able to figure out what they want and give it to them. And that is the most important part of selling, not constantly talking. You're a sales guy. What do you think of that theory?
I actually teach it all the time, like almost verbatim. And I know the book now, but I've been training salespeople for almost 20 years, and that book wasn't around when I first started. But but the philosophy was, and we were always told, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. Like that's a sales like 101 kind of thing. So the problem lies in where the magic happens is knowing when or knowing what you're listening to, making sure that you're actually paying attention to it. That's the thing. Most people think of listening as just not talking, and that's not the same thing. Like, actually listening to understand, listening to have an actual, like, gifted response rather than listening to simply respond, right? Like, there's a big difference behind that. And you can't sell anything without talking. Like, that just doesn't happen. So you have to be able to speak to people and understand and be able to express to them that you're giving them what they want. There's an art to that. But I do think you definitely need to listen a lot more than you speak in sales, for sure. That's been around for a very long time.
I wonder what Socrates would think of that.
I think he would like it, only from one perspective. Here's because again, in sales, when you're taught to jab, right? Like, so meaning you ask a question, the customer gives you the answer, rather than responding with, oh, this is what you want, this is what we got, right? Like, instead of you jab, you ask them follow-up question, a more in-depth, or you ask, like, you just continue on a path of these short questions to just try to get them to explain more and more of themselves and their thinking to you. I think this is what he did anyway. Socrates was the first salesperson on the planet. he did the same thing. He needled and jabbed and stuck it in there and just wanted to pull out more and more and more and more data from people. That's all he was looking for. He was looking for fodder. Like, he was just looking for that just whatever he could put down on paper to get people to get fired up.
Okay, so was Socrates' death the ultimate death of a salesman?
Probably, yes. Socrates is the death of a Sandler salesperson, in my opinion. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow.
I'm not gonna pick on it.
It's all of our Sandler sales reps out there. We love you.
No, because like I had this conversation with, like, there's the methodology behind Sandler is to that is the methodology, is to keep prodding but here's the clear difference from what I teach and what Sandler teaches. If somebody clearly tells you a definitive yes or no state, like something that, like, or a question that you should have a clear answer to, like, for example, hey son, how much does it cost? And Sandler would say, tell me why that's important to you, or why no, I'm asking you just tell me what it costs. I'm asking you a question, just asking you a direct question. I don't need that's the problem. That's what Socrates' problem was, right? Because if somebody asks you a direct question, just answer it, and then like I would in that same scenario. So Tom, what does it cost? Well, it costs this, but why does that matter to you? What are you looking to gain out of either reducing cost or like what does that matter to you? To explain to me why you're asking that question. I would still answer their question though, which is what I think to your point, why Socrates is the death of a Sandler salesperson, because he just decided never to answer the actual question. He just kept beating around the bush. Anyway,
and he drank the hemlock. So I mean, that's the other challenge there. All right.
Now, for all you Sandler training people out there, I'm not assuming that Sandler training is bad, so please don't rip the comments apart about Sandler.
Fine.
I was just making an observation here.
We love Sandler training systems. We love all training systems, from Zig Ziglar to whoever with Sandler. We have no problem with anybody with sales. Please, you got to get out there and sell yourself. You got to get out there and do something.
And if it works for you, it works. Just put it
exactly. That's right. Now we're gonna move ahead here a little bit in the Republic, and we're gonna skip past Socrates' description of the luxurious state, which is the and this is sort of where the republic's meat really exists, which is this idea of the state as a place where children can be born who have a prudent fear of poverty or war, and they do not act or behave beyond their means. And then Socrates gets into the idea, and some of this people believe is Plato putting his ideas in Socrates' mouth, less Socrates himself. But either way, both men have sort of merged together on this. The idea of how do you tame a spirit? How do you create a leader in a luxurious state where everything is provided for, other than, and well, not everything. Yes, where every material need is provided for. And now we have to be concerned about moral laxity, which we don't talk a lot about that on this podcast, but it does undergird some of the conversations that we do have. And so we're going to talk about it a little bit directly here as we read about the Guardian's temperament in chapter 8 of the Republic of Plato. So back to the book. Don't you think then, said I, that for the purpose of keeping guard, and by the way, keeping guard is how they're describing leadership. For the purpose of keeping guard, a young man should have much the same temperament and qualities as a well-bred watchdog. I mean, for instance, that both must have quick senses to detect an enemy, swiftness in pursuing him, and strength if they have to fight when they have caught him. Yes, they will need all those qualities. And also courage if they are to fight well, of course. And courage in dog or horse or any other creature implies a spirited disposition. You must have noticed that a high spirit is unconquerable. Every soul possessed of it is fearless and indomitable in the face of danger. Yes, I've noticed that. So now we know what physical qualities our guardian must have, and also that he must be of a spirited temper. Yes. Then, Glaucon, how are men of that natural disposition to be kept from behaving pugnaciously to one another and to the rest of their countrymen? It is not at all easy to see. And yet, they must be gentle to their own people and dangerous only to enemies. Otherwise, they will destroy themselves without waiting till others destroy them. True. What are we to do then? If gentleness and a high temper are contraries, where shall we find a character to combine them? Both are necessary to make a good guardian, but it seems they are incompatible, so we shall never have a good guardian. Well, it looks like it. Here I was perplexed, but on thinking over what we have been saying, I remarked that we deserved to be puzzled because we had not followed up on the comparison we had just drawn. What do you mean? He asked. We never noticed that, after all, there are natures in which these contraries are combined. They are to be found in animals, and not the least in the kind we compare to our guardian. Well-bred dogs, as you know, are by instinct perfectly gentle to people who they know and are accustomed to, and fierce to strangers. So the combination of qualities we require for our guardian is, after all, possible and not against nature. Evidently. Do you further agree that, besides this spirited temper, he must have a philosophical element to his nature? I don't see what you mean. This is another trait you will see in a dog. It is remarkable how the creature gets angry at the mere sight of a stranger and welcomes anyone he knows, though he may never have been treated unkindly by the one or kindly by the other. Did that ever strike you as curious? I had not thought of it before, but that is certainly how a dog behaves. Well, but that shows a fine instinct, which is philosophic in the true sense. How so? Because the only mark by which he distinguishes a friendly and an unfriendly face is that he knows the one and does not know the other. And if a creature makes that the test of what it finds congenial or otherwise, how can you deny that it has a passion for knowledge and understanding? Of course, I cannot. And that passion is the same thing as philosophy, the love of wisdom. Yes. Shall we boldly say, then, that the same is true of human beings? If a man is to be gentle towards his own people whom he knows, he must have an instinctive love of wisdom and understanding. Agreed. So the nature required to make a really noble guardian of our commonwealth will be a swift and strong, spirited and philosophic. Quite so. Given those natural qualities, then, how are these guardians to be brought up and educated? First, will the answer to that question help the purpose of our whole inquiry, which is how to make out justice and injustice grow in a state? We want to be thorough, but not draw out this discussion to a needless length. Glaucon's brother answered, I certainly think it will help. If so, I said, we must not think of dropping it, though it may be a rather long business. I agree. Come then. We will take our time and educate our imaginary citizens. Yes, let us do so. How are we to educate our guardians? Or, to paraphrase from Whitney Houston back in the day, I believe the children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside.
Yeah, how's that working out for us? Sorry, I just
no. This is the core. This is one of, again, 2,500 years of us arguing in the West over two questions, and we're gonna tussle a little bit over these two questions right now. What sort of men or women should a society have? And then the second question, which no one wants to talk about these days because this is a touchy one, but it is one of the only two questions really we're talking about. What kind of worldview do we want those people to have? Do we want them to have a secular, scientific, rationalist worldview? Do we want them to have a religious, theocratic, theological-minded worldview? Or do we want to find the mystical third way? Remember when Bill Clinton talked about the third way back in the day? Remember that? Yeah. We're going to find a third way between those two, except there is no third way. But this is the argument we've been having in the West for 2,500 years. And it's sharp in America because, to your point about individualism, there's 315 million individuals in this country, and they all have an opinion about what sort of person should be not just an American, but what sort of person should be produced by an American society. And this is, of course, why the Greeks hated democracy. Well, not hated, but they looked at a side eye at democracy. And that's also why we don't live in a democracy. We actually live under a republican, small r, form of government. We don't actually live in a democracy. Because, well, anyway, there's a whole lot of practical reasons, which we'll get into in July when we discuss our third round of going through the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and we discuss all the recent Supreme Court decisions that will be coming out in July. We'll get into all that down there. Point is, these are the two core questions. What sort of men or women should a society have? And from immigration to education, this has been the struggle of America. You and I both have backgrounds of people that I won't say that didn't come from here, but like didn't come from here and then came here and mixed with everybody else, right? You have a background of people who were here and then mixed with other folks who showed up from other places. What sort of men or women should a society have? What kind of people do we want to create?
Well, I think it's hilarious actually in the way in the first excerpt that you read, where he describes who the society will quote unquote need, right?
Right. Oh yeah.
Because he's not wrong. Like, you need farmers, and like you need those people that are going to produce food. You also need people that are going to, facilitate those relationships with foreign entities to get the stuff that you can't. I mean, there's no place on the planet that will produce everything a society needs. It just doesn't exist. That does not exist. Back into the days, before governments even existed, we had trade, right? So like when we were all tribes people, never mind the Americas, or like there were at one point the entire world was covered with tribes people, and they still had trade and barter because of things that they couldn't produce themselves. So
I'll do you one better. If the entire internet goes down because World War III breaks out, which I think we got to knock off all that talk, but okay, fine. Let's walk down that road a little bit. If that actually breaks out and we're all nuclear Armageddon into wherever, it'll take us about 5 minutes to get back to trading things.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you see it. It's depicted in every apocalyptic movie ever. Like they're giving us the roadmap right there. When this world goes to kaplooey, guess what? The idea of paper money or coins is going to be irrelevant. Nobody's going to care. They're going to care about the clothes on their back and the food in their stomach, the house over their head. How do I get those
Mad Max? They were having wars over gas.
Yeah, exactly. They're having wars over the simplest stuff because that's what's left, right? Like
gas and water. Yep.
Anyway, like there's
and by the way, we will be trading for gas and water. We will be. Like that's what will happen.
There's a lot of depictions of that.
Yeah, because that's right, because that exists outside the state. But again, even in those societies, you see this in the one of the.
And by the way, we don't need an overseeing government to tell us what to do or how to do that either. By the way, like that's the other part of it, because that overstating that goes away. Like, see ya, we don't need you. We're gonna do our own thing.
It'll be a bunch of people, the survivors all left just screaming "who" and then just walking away.
right, yeah, exactly.
I don't understand. No, I mean, you see this in The Walking Dead. So I watched the first season of that show. And I made it through about halfway through the second season before I was just done. I was finished because there was too much caterwauling about like we got to get back to the world as it was. I was like, come on, give me a break. I couldn't buy into that. But fundamentally, in The Walking Dead, I mean, you see this. There's a disaster that shows up, and the societies, the mini societies that are set up. And I found this out after reading, stuff from other people, but the many societies that are set up inside of that or subsequent to that apocalypse are, of course, consumed with the idea of what sort of men or women should our society have? Who is in and who's out? And this is what Socrates is talking about. Who's in and who's out? How do we educate them once we've decided that they're in? Now, that's a second order question. But the first order question is, what kind of people will we have?
I think the simplest version of this, right, is as long as it's a variety, you'll be okay. If you have 5 people that are all doing and saying the same thing, you're not going to be okay, right? Like, I just look again. Let's take this to one step further, right?
Sure.
Society's gone. We're in an apocalyptic state. All I have is my family with me, right? I feel like we're going to be okay. My son and I know how to hunt. We can get food out of whatever animal we get. We can get clothing out of the animals. We know how to tan hides. Certain things about that we know how to do. We have, there are other people in our family that know how to sew, that know how to create things out of we will be okay because of our family unit has a diverse level of knowledge when it comes to survival outside of societal norms.
Sure.
Now, part of that, again, Jesan has led, as alluded to, for those of you first listeners to the podcast, my background in culture, my family is Native American. We still to this day teach some of those old ways. So we have people that can drive. We have good negotiators. We have people in our family that have been, they've owned their own businesses. So again, as long as you have a variety, I don't even care what the variety is. You have a better shot at survival if you have a variety of personnel and personalities than if you have 5 auto mechanics or 5 plumbers or 25, carpenters. It doesn't make sense.
Dare I say you're talking about a diversity of skill sets?
Yes. So it's a diversity of skill sets. I think personalities matter too, though, because I'm just saying if you don't have somebody that can challenge the status quo, even within your own group. I mean, again, go back and watch the rest of the 842 seasons of The Walking Dead. I'm sorry.
I know you're right. Yeah, and all the spinoffs. Good Lord.
All the spinoffs, right? I watched the first 4 seasons. I couldn't get past the 4th. After the 4th season, to me, it just became very repetitive. It was the same thing over and over, same storylines over and over. But anyway, but if everybody thinks alike, you tend to be very stagnant in your ability to plan, to project, to alter course. You're very, very limited. If you have a diverse personality group and a diverse skill set, it's easier to start making adjustments as you go because you get input from different people, you get input from different philosophies, different thinking, and then you can make the best group decision you can make based on all of the information presented to you.
Now, let me push back on this because this is the pushback on that. And this is pushback that I hear from, interestingly enough, because what you're describing fundamentally at a small level is the American experience. Or the American experiment. That's fundamentally what you're describing, but at a very micro or macro level. Yeah, you are. You don't think? Oh, okay.
It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Well, okay, go ahead.
Well, okay. This is where the pushback comes. So if I'm observing your small group from the outside, and for a time, there's some things that are getting done. Like decisions are getting made, things are moving forward, looks great. And at an indefinable time in the future, you're going to hit something that your group cannot overcome. It might be something material, it might be something psychological, it might be something, dare I say, spiritual, whatever, right? It's going to be one of those big 3, right? And your group, and this is what someone from the outside would say, observing, who maybe comes from a group that's more, shall we say, homogenous in your group, they're going to look at that moment where you hit that chaotic, disruptive piece, and they're going to predict, I'm not going to say they're correct, but they're going to predict that you're going to fall apart because you have too many divergent voices with too many divergent skill sets. And then splitting and breaking, fracturing, dare I say, will occur. And then the whole experiment falls apart. And that is one of the major knocks against America these days, that we've been yelling at each other with chaos for the last 20 years, and that we are rattling and almost falling apart. And in some cases, some folks would go so far. And by the way, this is from much more homogenous societies than others. China will knock us this way. Scandinavia, Finland will knock us this way. Russia will knock us this way. And yet, there are other folks who will say, don't mistake the chaos and the argumentation for the thing falling apart. Because when the decision gets made, click, they're going to go in that direction. They always have, right? But when you're going through that chaotic moment, it doesn't feel like you're going to click.
True. Now, again, I think there's reasons why on a bigger scale, you have way more hurdles, in my opinion, than you do on a smaller scale, right? Of course. So, because societies in general have survived that way for thousands of years before the formation of real governments.
Right.
Like, again, I go back to tribal people, whether it was, across Asia or, or Australia, Africa, United States, when they were tribal people, they, to your point, it could be, it becomes chaotic when it gets to the point of, now I need to bring people together to make a decision. Let's have a discussion about it. I need everyone's counsel. So you're going to tell me all the pros and cons you see. You tell me all the pros and cons you see. And we're going to make a decision based on all of this collectiveness. But once we make the decision, we go there. Now, that being said, you still did have that occasionally where, again, I rather than think of one family unit, think of it more of a tribal unit. Let's say there's 1,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. You might have somebody so butthurt that they take their 2 or 3 family units that encompasses 50 people out of the 1,000, and they go, we're just going to go this way anyway. Mm-hmm. And you say, good luck to you so long. And that's it. That's the end of it. That to me is not fractioning and falling apart. That's a single piece of your body that goes a different direction because they feel strongly about that. And then if their success and failure is now on their own, like they get to decide on their own success and failure, but their decision-making process is going to be the same because they just saw and learned what all of this. They're going to try to make whatever their 50-person unit. They think it's going to be better, but it ends up being the same. And they grow their 50 to 1,000, and they have the same thing that happens.
Right, and then there's a fracturing again, and so on and so on. Right.
But with the United States and our government, there's actual documentation that says that that's not quote unquote supposed to happen. Now, that's not suggesting that at some point to your barometer earlier, an indefinite time in the future, the United States could look at this and go, hey, listen, we're going to be, we're going to separate into 4 different countries because we just can't get our shit together anymore. Excuse my language. We can't get on the same page. This northeastern part of the country is going to be one country, southeast, northwest, and southwest. We're just going to divide into 4 countries. You guys go do your own thing and be done with it. I'm not suggesting that I could never see that happening. I don't in my lifetime, but I'm saying if the feces were to really hit the fan, I could see that happening to some degree with the northeast, southeast, northwest, like just
fortunately for you, in the next segment, I've got a balm for that Gilead. I got a balm from Gilead for that wound. Because I think the feces has already hit the fan, and I think we're out of the feces fan hitting moment. I think we are just on the other side of past that. And don't get me wrong, there still might be more incidents of that. I mean, heck, we have an entire year to go through here. This is why we're starting off with the Republic. But I do think we reached the high watermark of all that nonsense in 2020. I actually do. I'm sorry. I know that some people disagree with me on that, and they think that I'm Pollyannish. You've been with me, well over 2 years now in various projects, and a year on the podcast. I don't think I strike you as being a Pollyanna.
No.
So I'm cautiously optimistic. I'll frame it that way, that we're crossing the other we're crossing the other side of the river on something. I think a decision has been made. There is a click that has occurred, and I've said it before on the podcast, and I'm going to keep saying it because I do think it's happened. But I think the manifestation of that in the body politic and in decisions, it's going to be the lag. It's the lag part that we're going through right now.
Yeah.
And so the lag always includes whatever the hell chaos was that you just came out of, and all of your memories of that, and then you gotta snap to wherever the next decision is. But we're still consumed with the idea, or consumed with the idea. We're still sort of dancing around the question: what sort of men or women should a society have? What sort of character or temperament should they have? And Socrates, leans into wisdom, and we're going to read another section in here which talks about what the specific pieces are, like wisdom and specific character temperaments, which we never talk about character anymore either, which is a shame. But what kind of character do we want those people in that little tribe to have? Do we want them to have a character that is conformist, or do we want them to have a character that's nonconformist? Do we want them to have a character that's patient and full of gentleness and meekness and kindness, to go to the book of Galatians in the Bible? Or do we want them to have a character that is more warlike and authoritarian and competitive? Who makes that decision about what kind of people we're going to have? Because Socrates would imply, and Plato supports this, but Socrates would imply that the state is the one that creates the guardians and is responsible for the education of the young. As a matter of fact, he goes on about this for quite some time in talking about sort of what comedies, what plays the young should watch, and that there should be censorship in the arts. He wasn't a big fan of the artists, by the way, and the creatives, because he thought they got away with too much. So, and he also believed that creativity in the arts was way more influential than formal education on shaping the character of the young, which is another thing we don't like to talk about.
Could you imagine Socrates today watching movies in cinema? They'd be like, "Oh, the apocalypse is already here. Look,
it's already here."
God, that would be.
He would yell in Greek, "What the hell?" And then he'd just walk out. He'd be searching for a hemlock shop somewhere, anywhere. It's got to be something.
It's funny that you say, like, it's so hard to picture yourself like being like agreeing with somebody who was alive 2,500 years ago, like thinking that like there's just certain pieces of it that I can see, like how his fear came to fruition, right? Like when he talks about, to your point, like when he talks about the arts being more influential than formal education. Think about that for a second. We start watching television shows at 2-3 years old. Our formal education doesn't start till 5 or 6. He's right. Like, we're being influenced now. Great. If you have awesome parents and they have you watching educational shows at a very young age, or at least shows that are supposed to be educationally entertaining or whatever, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Sesame Street comes to mind, like 1, 2, 3's ABCs, like they're teaching you that stuff.
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Yeah, stuff like that. Great. Or as if you're off watching like some random cartoon that's just some mind-numbing Mickey Mouse thing or whatever. I don't know. Sorry, Disney. I don't mean that, but you know what I mean. But it's like, he's right to that respect. So like, should we as a society have more censorship over that programming? Which, by the way, was the whole point of PBS in the first place. Like, go back to like, I forget, was it Nixon or no, it wasn't Nixon.
Carter. I think it was Carter.
I think it was Carter. I think you're right. I think it was Carter. I know it was around that era. It was like the 70s where somebody went, "Oh, we should spin up a TV channel that is really for educational purposes." And everyone said that was a great idea. And now look at it. Nobody watches it, by the way. Like, it's like, and it still is quality TV, but I still find myself watching some of the documentaries on PBS, thinking to myself, I wish everybody watched this. Like, there's just good. It's good television, people. I'm just saying PBS does some good stuff. But that
rubs up against the idea of autonomy and independence.
True.
Does the state, this is the whole point of the First Amendment, does the state make a law requiring certain things around speech, which goes directly to education, goes directly to entertainment, goes directly to everything, or does the state, and this is what the founding fathers would say, is the state agnostic on that? Matter of fact,
but they're not
agnostic. They're not. But again, we're going to what the principle is. Right? Is the state agnostic, and you're going to let, to paraphrase from Chairman Mao, 1,000 poppies bloom.
I think they tried their damnedest to get the happy medium, right? The best of both worlds, which is why now everything you turn on has a rating on it.
Right.
It'll say Y7 or whatever. They're at least trying to inform parents. They still give the developers of those programs the freedom of speech, and they can do whatever they want as long as you list it and label it as to what it is. And then parents have the wherewithal to either elect or not elect to let their kids watch it. So in a way, the state is responsible for doing just that, what Socrates is talking about, and saying, this is what you should be watching. Now, if the parents throw caution to the wind and say, I'm going to let my 5-year-old watch Freddy Krueger or whatever, like whatever R-rated horror movie.
Well, let's not even do Freddy Krueger. Forget that. That's okay. That's Freddy Krueger. Sure. Forget that. We had in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, a mere 90 years ago now.
Cheapers.
I know, right? I did that math in my head just by myself. We had children as young as 2 and 3 years old attending hangings and lynchings. Don't talk about Freddy Krueger. Don't talk to me about art over there. Like, people want to talk about the good old days as if there was some like magical halcyon place. Let's have a real honest conversation about the good old days. Do you want your kid attending a hanging, or do you want your kid watching Cuties on Netflix?
Or do you want your kid picking up a stone because they're part of the community? Like, do you really? Yeah.
But this is creating this. But this is the can of worms that Socrates opens by talking about what kind of people we want to have as guardians. What kind of people do we want to have in the state? And by the way, you're right. There are only certain levels of people that he believed were capable of handling education. So men, okay, landowners, okay. And then the Romans took it a step further and said who served in war. Women were out. They weren't part of the franchise. Okay. Children were literal property. Matter of fact, in ancient Greek culture, they did not have a conception of homosexuality or pedophilia in the way that we conceive of that sort of thing. The philosophy or the theology that gave us that idea that might be a not great thing, the child's not maybe property, was Christianity. They were really the precursors of that. And Judaism. Like, Jerusalem met Athens, and all of a sudden Athens went, oh, particularly Athenian women, went, oh, that means we have to protect our kids. Oh, and that also means we have rights. And then Athenian men went and jumped off a cliff somewhere.
Someone said, release the Kraken, and they just all fell in.
They just fell in, they just jumped into the water. I kid, ladies, I kid. But it's taken a long time in the West for us to work through these ideas of who has franchise and who doesn't. And the most radical, I still will say, the most radical country on the planet that has taken this idea of franchise, we're even doing it with gender now. We're the most radical country on the planet because we've taken this idea of franchise and we've blown the doors off of it. Which I believe would shock Socrates. It would shock, you talk about television. I don't think he'd be shocked so much by that as by the idea that all of these folks get to vote and get to have a say in the demos. They get to have a say in the democracy. To him, that would be outrageous, because what sort of person has a society produced who goes and attends, it takes their kid and goes and attend to, I'm going to go to the least controversial one in my example list there, takes their kid to go see a hanging. What sort of society is producing that kind of person who doesn't know morally that they shouldn't, not religiously, not based on Jesus, based on Greek philosophy, knows they probably shouldn't, probably not a good idea to take that kid to go see a hanging. What kind of society produces that and says that's okay? That would bake his gourd.
Yeah, true. I got no rebuttal.
I think that would really, but well, it's baking the noodle of people who are around now. So, okay, worldview. We can make this short. What kind of worldview should a leader have? And by the way, I've been holding on to this question for you since we started talking about Shakespeare last year. I've been holding my powder on this question for you because I have an idea of the answer to it, but I want to hear what your idea is.
You know, it's so weird. Like I never really gave. I don't give much thought to that because I'm so. I look like my kids and I have this conversation a lot because my son will come home and be like, "Dad, did you read the latest thing that somebody said over in China or Ukraine or whatever?" And I'll go, "And how's that impacting you right now? Like what exactly? What changes in your life if that really happens? Whatever that is. Again, whether
Sure.
whether Russia drops a nuke on Ukraine or China decides to, blow up Taiwan, whatever, right? Like whatever the or I think one of his latest ones was something about like a Chinese war vessel coming too close to an American ship or something like that. And I was like, and like they do that stuff all the time. You just don't know about it because it's not like, but the fact that it's being published today is now impacting your day. Like you're allowing this to rent space in your head. Why don't you let people that know a little bit more about what's going on worry about that instead of you, right?
Okay.
Like, so, and so he's like, well, aren't you worried about this starting a world war, blah, blah, and I'm like, nope. No, here's my. I don't think there's a country on the planet that wants to see the entire world blown to smithereens. So they're going to do anything in their power to not have World War III happen. Like they've already seen this twice. They've read that book. They don't like the outcome. They're not going to do it all over again. Now that being said, I'm not suggesting that everything is copacetic and everybody's singing kumbaya around the campfire. I get. I'm realistic. I know that the United States and China are never going to have a great relationship. The United States and Russia are never going to be best buds. Like it's not like the bully in the coming of age movie where the bully picks on the kid fights back, and now they're best friends. Like that's not going to happen, right? Like we know that. But what we do know is that here's my. I'll move on. I'll try to answer your question in a second, but I also feel like it's going to stay like this for all of time until we have some sort of external existential crisis that forces the human race to think of each other as a human race and not as Russian or Chinese or American or like we all bleed red when we bleed. So what, like, I think it's going to be like, again, go back to the movies. It's going to be some alien invasion or some comet hitting the earth that wakes us up to realize that we should be thinking of this as a worldly unit instead of individual countries. And if we solve this, whatever problem is coming at us, then we're going to be better off for it. And we're going to be better off as a world for it, right?
You do know that there will still be those people though that will claim it's all a conspiracy from the New World Order and that the reptilian aliens are like nonsense from Klaus Schwab. You know that, right? There are going to be that cohort of people who are going to be like, I don't want to go along with your new glorious utopia.
Yes.
Okay.
I get it.
All right. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Okay.
But
answer your question.
But again, so in that case, right? So you asked me, what kind of leader do I want, right? Like what kind of world?
Yeah. What kind of worldview do you want your leader to have?
So I essentially
And by the way, world
the
doesn't have to mean the global world. It could just mean the world of like their backyard.
well, no. I was thinking there's a global first,
Okay,
right?
okay, okay.
Because if you think about it, like everything else can work backwards. Because when it comes to my home, I can be a little selfish, but I don't want to be selfish when it comes to my city.
Mm-hmm,
I could be a little selfish with the city, but not selfish. When
mm-hmm,
it comes to the state, the selfishness should go even further away, and so on and so forth. So it becomes a point where, like, it's almost like I want them to put, I want their worldview to be humanity first, our country second. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm. Okay.
It's almost like a hierarchy of thinking as opposed to just a linear view of thinking. Because again, the best way I can describe it is the local politicians in my city, they're my neighbors. I know them. I can pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I don't like the way you voted on this. I need, like, what's going on with this? They can talk me through it one on one. When you talk about, so I have a much firmer grasp on our local government and how it impacts me on a day-to-day basis. Again, go back to my conversation with my son.
Mm-hmm.
China sending a destroyer or whatever their warships are called, buzzing by a US fleet, does not change what my grocery prices are at the grocery store tomorrow.
No,
But the
no.
tax hike that my local government pushes or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
could that impacts me immediately, right? So something that impacts me immediately, I expect them to have more, or I expect to be able to be worried about more. How does it impact me? How do I work on this? It doesn't impact all of humanity. It impacts me personally, one on one. It impacts me. As I go up the ladder on governmental levels, I'm more worried about how it impacts the selection of me's and not necessarily me personally, because more times than not, it a decision they make, again, would it go from local to state, it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Like our state government impacts me a little bit. They change a tax law, or they change some sort of, you know, speed limit on on my favorite road or whatever. Like, yeah, that can
Right.
impact me a little bit, but it impacts more of our localized society. So our localized society should be your thought process when you're trying to make that law. Our federal government, the more removed you are from the government level, the more I want them thinking about the whole and not the individual person,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Okay.
so to your question about the worldview, I really think that our world leaders in general, all of them, not just the United States, I think all of our world leaders should be thinking about humanity first. What is good for humanity as a whole? And then what is good for my country? But that's definitely not the way they think. But I think the world would be a better place.
I
You
think
know?
we saw, well, and I think some of the bedeviling problems that we consistently yell and scream about, for instance, this idea of social justice, right?
Yes.
Which is an all-consuming idea now in our particular cultural moment, and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and who gets to be the president of Harvard and whatever. Okay. Well, I had to drop that in there because
I was waiting. I was waiting for it.
I have some thoughts on that, but that's neither here nor there. Well, actually, no. You know what? No. What kind of person do we want to lead Harvard? What kind of person do we want to lead IBM? What kind of person do we want to lead any of these multinational corporations and or public-private entities like Harvard that have endowments of over $1 billion, or that where the CEO is making $50,000 a month and runs a small country?
Yeah.
What kind of worldview do we want those folks to have? Because those folks, pache politicians, to your point, politicians having a worldview that focuses on humanity, the higher up they go. Okay, I might push back a poke a little bit on that, but in general, okay, I can go along with that. But when we talk about a multinational Fortune 500 company where the person is in essence behaving as if they are a politician or a president of a small country, but they do not have the posture of being oriented towards humanity, even though they may say they do. To paraphrase from Elon Musk, I am also tired of people who want to look good but do evil. I've also had enough of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
So
but we
what kind
have
of
the
people do we
power
want?
to we have the power to change that just as we do in politics. Stop
We do.
buying their products. But
Right,
we don't,
exactly. But we don't.
because we don't, because whatever, Samsung has the best technology on the phones, or iPhone, or Apple has the best music selection, whatever that,
Mm-hmm.
whatever
Whatever it may be.
whatever your justification is,
Right.
because that impacts you personally,
Right.
right?
And
Like, so
right. And so what kind of people do we cannot get away from these two questions being locked together. What kind of
sure.
worldview do we want people to have, and what sort of society do we want to have produce these kinds of folks? And by the way, this is why people keep reading the Republic, and this is why it is so influential, because these questions run through everything from politics to economics to warfare. I mean, we've talked about all of this, cultural entertainment, all of it. It's all impacted here, which means it is of course what is not it is of course these two questions locked together are of course part of a human problem, regardless, by the way, even of time and climb. They're reading the Republic of Plato, in the Muslim world. They're reading the Republic of Plato in Argentina. They're reading the Republic of Plato, when it's not censored by the state, in China. So, I mean, it's these dialogues, these kinds of conversations. And by the way, there is no right answer. Socrates would say the conversation itself is the answer to the question, because we have to talk these things out. Otherwise, authoritarian guardians will come in, authoritarian leaders will come in and just set up a dictatorship.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, the Romans really liked. They really liked
By
it too.
the way, there are companies, and you can there's plenty of other podcasts that talk about this, but and you hear our mutual colleague JP talk about conscious capitalism all the time.
Yep.
That's the Patagonias of the world that are really
Yep.
trying to put humanity first. They don't always succeed, and they're not perfect at it. So I'm not suggesting that go buy all Patagonia products because they're the best company in the world. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that companies like Patagonia are at least putting forth the effort, where, to your point, where you're not just trying to make it look good. You're actually physically trying to do the right thing.
For sure.
And whether you succeed or fail sometimes is not the most important thing to a consumer, but the fact that you are doing that, you're trying. I think if more companies kind of bought into this Patagonia style of thinking, we might make some impact. But again, it's the consumer that forces that issue, by the way. So we as consumers have the power to look at a company like IBM, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, any one of these giant companies, and say, we're just not going to buy your products anymore until you start looking at this from a global perspective and in a humanities perspective.
Well, and I think that is already starting to happen. In fact, I think that's been happening for the last 10 years, because
It's
what
been a lot longer than that. The very first instance of conscious capitalism brought to the attention was 1984.
Okay, 1984. Okay,
Yeah.
going back to 1984. But I don't think it really hit
It hasn't hit a launching pad until about 5 years ago.
right. Well, and I think that the thing that was missing in 1984 that really got ramped up probably about 5 or 6 years ago is the ability of individual people to understand how social media works.
Yeah.
And to socially connect with each other in smaller and smaller groups, further and further away from the dominant center. So you're seeing this all over the place. You talk about conscious capitalism. Okay. It's also happening in various Christian sects in the United States. They're falling apart left and right.
Yeah.
But you've got pastors who draw no more than 100 bodies to their church, who are publishing their sermons on YouTube and are generating millions and millions of views. And people are connecting to them who never would go to that church.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So the majority report may say, or no, the majority report may include large organizations like a Patagonia that's been doing what they've been doing since they were first founded, right? Back in the 1980s. But that report also has to include all of these other smaller entities that have popped up because of the nature of connection with social connection. Now people actually understand how social connection works online. And we have to acknowledge the fracturing and disruptive power of the internet and its ability to connect people of like mind. So if I really don't want to buy guns, not I'm going to say buy guns. If I really, really don't like, I'm going to pick a really hot button topic here. If I really, really don't like abortion, I can connect with a bunch of people online that really, really, really don't like abortion. And I don't really care how you feel about it. I don't like abortion. I connected with a bunch of people who don't like abortion. Now we're all going to get together and we're going to do whatever it is we're going to do. Or on the opposite side of that, I really, really like abortion. I'm going to find a whole bunch of people who support that, and we're going to connect together. And I don't really care what you feel about that either.
Right.
And this creates, remember that idea of chaos I was talking about when you look at it from the outside? This creates more chaos. This creates more fracturing, because what the internet does as a connection machine, but also as a broadcast machine, is it broadcasts all these fracturings to the world, by the way. Now, that could be interesting for a connection because, to go back to the hot button topic, if I don't really, really like abortion in Iowa, but no one in my neighborhood cares and never has, I could connect with somebody in Germany that cares. And now it's a global thing. You talked about humanity. Now it's a global thing. Now I'm connected with someone in Germany. I'm connected with someone in Russia. I'm connected with a group in Argentina who all really, really don't like abortion. And now we're all working together to stop abortions. And I'm not working with people who are in my backyard. That looks chaotic. That's the chaotic power of the internet. And I don't think we know how to handle that at all.
No, I agree. I don't think we do either. But well, again, I think this part could potentially be a conversation for all by itself, because it's, it might be more of an illusion of chaos versus actual chaos. Because again, so think about it, what you just said, person in Iowa connects with a person in Germany, now it's a global thing, blah blah blah. But does that global thing, is that able to impact the Iowa state government? Probably not. So it's
Probably
an illusion
not.
of chaos. It's an illusion of chaos versus actual chaos.
But with climate change, to go to something that's very popular, with climate change, okay, I can connect. If I'm a small group of activists in Nebraska, not to pick on Iowa, I'm not going to go to Nebraska. If I'm a small group of activists in Nebraska, I can connect with globally every NGO on the planet that's battling climate change. And by the way, those NGOs have had success in changing governmental policies in these various countries at a supranational level. That's insane. That's the power of the internet. That would not have happened in 1984. That's the fundamental difference between 1984 and now, right? Yeah. And so I don't think we've really gotten our arms around the disruptive power of the internet as a communication tool, much less the disruptive power of social media as a connection tool.
Not so much a communication as an organization tool.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Organization tool. Okay.
You're going to organize and mobilize a bunch of people. I mean, think about it. 100 years ago, we were putting flyers on people's doors saying, come down to City Hall on Tuesday, right? Now we have that, we can expand that well beyond our reach of our physical reach. But but that doesn't mean we can't mobilize them to start. Like you can actually mobilize protests on a national level and synchronize them with the power. To your point, we haven't done this yet, but I don't think it's far away.
Well, Occupy Wall Street was the first sort of beta example of that. I would assert we have. Occupy Wall Street was the first beta example. I think the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020 Whether you think
that to me was probably a closer example of what I was talking about.
right. That's a closer
So if
example.
you could actually organize those to happen simultaneously
Right.
versus in pockets, like,
Yep.
because we were reading about them as they were happening, Tuesday and then Friday and then Saturday and then 2 weeks from now another one and 2 weeks. I'm talking about globalizing your mobilization through that
Mhm.
through that organized communication, right?
I
Like, so
think,
you're going to be able to. I think you're going to see that
yeah,
sometime in the very near future.
yeah. I think people, I
Think
think
of it like Think of it like flash mobs on a global scale.
on
Like,
the
ready
on
to
a
go.
global scale. Yeah. Well, the Canadian truckers are an example, where that happened in real time. Um,
That's true. I didn't think of them. Although it was, I mean, it really wasn't world news, but whatever. It's
yeah, well, it was important for the people in the world of Canada,
yeah,
and of
yeah,
course in the world of Washington D.C., January 6th was an important thing for the people in Washington D.C.
right.
I'm going to leave that aside. I've already touched on abortion today. I already said the A word. I don't need to go into any of the rest of that over there. What I'll say is, I agree. I think that the concentric circles of connection and coordination, you talk about organization, coordination, are getting tighter and tighter.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, what end and what impact that will have, that remains to be seen. But I do hold to my original thesis that we actually have no clue what we've unleashed. I think we're at the beginning of that particular revolution. We're nowhere near the middle, nowhere near the middle, much less the end.
yeah, yeah.
All right, back to the book. We got around the corner. Back to the book. That was a long segment. Back to the book. Back to the Republic of Plato. The edition that I have is translated directly from the Greek with extensive notes. And by the way, the version that I've got also had notes that were in it from a philosophy professor who actually owned the book before me. So it's kind of interesting to read those notes. If you could find an annotated version with notes written in it by other people, you can also get all of that extra information as well, and those extra insights as well. All right, cool. So we're going to move to chapter 12 here. We're going to read a little bit of a section here on what should the virtues be of the state. What should the virtues be that are the primary drivers for the guardians? What sort of people should we have? And in particular, I like to frame this conversation or this excerpt in light of the idea, and I've already said it a couple times on this podcast, that I think America is coming out of a chaotic cycle, and we're about to go into what I think is going to be a cultural, technological, and potentially even economic high. And I think that is on the horizon. I could feel it on the horizon. And again, I'm not a
Well,
Pollyanna.
if history tells us anything, though, I don't think you're being a Pollyanna, because if history tells us anything, that is a very real probability.
Absolutely.
Out of the Great Depression came some of the best years of economics in the United States. Out of the Vietnam War came some of the best. Out of the Cold War came some of the best. Out of 9/11 came some of the, like, so all of these tragic events in human history, and I'm sorry, in US history, have had some way of turning the economic corner for us. And COVID is probably not going to be very different. I don't think you're so far off the ledge here
Mm-hmm.
that I wouldn't call you a Pollyanna because of that. Just knowing the history the way I do, I think people who are calling you Pollyanna probably aren't. They're not thinking back far enough to realize that a lot of this stuff has already happened. We've seen this
Right.
a couple. And by the way, not even that far, not that long ago, the banking collapse of 2008.
Yeah.
Right outside of that, we had a couple of really rocky years, and then we had some of our lowest mortgage rates possible.
Mm-hmm.
Houses were going off the shelf like crazy. People were quitting jobs without having a job lined up because they weren't worried about their employment. They thought they could get a job tomorrow. Like, all that stuff happened after 08.
Mm-hmm.
So it, I think you're on to something about with it. I don't think you're
Yeah.
being at all. I think it's
Well, and I
I
think
think people are just forgetting their history.
I think I agree with that. I also think that these things go in 20-year cycles. And so from 2001 to 2020, that's I mean, we're at the end of a 20-year cycle.
Yeah.
Will there be some blowback and some shed off and some other things? Yes, absolutely. But I think we're at the end of a 20-year cycle. I also believe that fundamentally we have to be looking at what we require of our leaders, because the leaders who were positioned to lead in chaos cannot be the same people who lead in the position of a high.
I agree with that too.
So, chapter 12, virtues in the state, wisdom. To begin, then, the first quality to come into view in our state seems to be its wisdom, and there appears to be something odd about this quality. What is there odd about it? I think the state we have described really has wisdom, for it will be prudent in counsel, won't it? Yes. And prudence in counsel is clearly a form of knowledge. Good counsel cannot be due to ignorance and stupidity, clearly. But there are many and various kinds of knowledge in our commonwealth. There is the knowledge possessed by the carpenters or the smiths and the knowledge of how to raise crops. Are we to call the state wise and prudent on the strength of these forms of skill? No, they would only make it good at furniture making or working in copper or agriculture. Well, then, is there any form of knowledge possessed by some among the citizens of our newfound commonwealth, which will enable it to take thought, not for some particular interest, but for the best possible conduct of the state as a whole in its internal and external relations? Yes, there is. Where is it, and where does it reside? It is precisely that art of guardianship which resides in those rulers whom we just now call guardians in the full sense. And what would you call the state on the strength of that knowledge? Prudent and truly wise. And do you think there will be more or fewer of these genuine guardians in our state than there will be smiths? Far fewer. Fewer, in fact, than any of those other groups who are called after the kinds of skills they possess. Much fewer. So if a state is constituted on natural principles, the wisdom it possesses as a whole will be due to the knowledge residing in the smallest part, the one which takes the lead and governs the rest. Such knowledge is the only kind that deserves the name of wisdom, and it appears to be ordained by nature that the class privileged to possess it should be the smallest of all. Quite true. Here, then, we have more or less made out one of our four qualities and its seat in the structure of our commonwealth, to my satisfaction, at any rate. Next, there is courage. It is not hard to discern that quality or the part of the community in which it resides so as to entitle the whole to be called brave. Why do you say so? Because anyone who speaks of a state as either brave or cowardly can only be thinking of that part of it which takes the field and fights in its defense. The reason being, I imagine, that the character of the state is not determined by the bravery or cowardice of the other parts. No. Courage, then, is another quality which a community owes to a certain part of itself. And its being brave will mean that, in this part, it possesses the power of preserving, in all circumstances, a conviction about the sort of things that it is right to be afraid of, the conviction implanted by the education which the lawgiver has established. Is that not what you mean by courage? I do not quite understand. Well, will you say it again? I am saying that courage means preserving something. Yes, but what? The conviction inculcated by lawfully established education about the sorts of things which may be rightly be feared. When I add in all circumstances, I mean preserving it always and never abandoning it, whether under the influence of pain or of pleasure, of desire or fear. And then we're going to move forward a little bit. Two qualities, I went on, still remain to be made out in our state: temperance, and the object of our whole inquiry, justice. Can we discover justice without troubling ourselves further about temperance? I do not know, and I would rather not have justice come into light first, if that means we should not go on to consider temperance. So if you please, take me to temperance first. Of course, I have every wish to please you. Do go on, then. I will. At first sight, temperance seems more like some sort of concord or harmony than the other qualities did. How so? Temperament surely means a kind of orderliness, a control of certain pleasures and appetites. People use the expression master of oneself, whatever that means, and various other phrases that point the same way. Quite true. Is not master of oneself an absurd expression? A man who was master of himself would presumably also be subject to himself, and the subject would be the master, for all these terms apply to the same person. No doubt. I think, however, the phrase means that within the man himself, in his soul, there is a better part and a worse, and that he is his own master when the part which is better by nature has the worse under its control. It is certainly a term of praise, whereas it is considered a disgrace when, through bad breeding or bad company, the better part is overwhelmed by the worst, like a small force outnumbered by a multitude. A man in that condition is called a slave to himself and intemperate. Probably that is what is meant. Then now look at our newly found state, and you will find one of these two conditions realized there. You will agree that it deserves to be called master of itself if temperance and self-mastery exist, where the better part rules the worst. Temperance, wisdom, courage, and justice. These are the four things that Socrates would assert are necessary for a guardian, for a leader to be a good one. Not even great, just good, just showing up. These are the table stakes, as they say in poker. The hardest one out of all four of those, if we were to rank order them, I would say the hardest one probably to obtain, because it takes the longest to attain, is wisdom. Now, I shave off most of my gray hairs. Tom allows them to be proudly displayed. You can see them on the video if you want to watch the video. And there is this idea of a gray pilgrim from Lord of the Rings, or a gray traveler that I believe Longfellow, or it might have been Thoreau, talked about, that occurred, or that shows up, an individual, a nomad, a person who is a prophet somewhat, who shows up at the end of a historical cycle. And this individual, much like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, checks the worst excesses of the past cycle in order to make a space for the best things of the next cycle to begin. That's the ability to do that check comes from the quality of wisdom. I think Socrates would agree with that. As we exit the fourth turning, from William Strauss and Neil Howe, if you ever read that book, that's where I'm getting this language from, this idea from. I think we're exiting the fourth turning. I think we're at the end of the 20 years of chaos that came after the unraveling that began in the mid-1980s and continued through the end of the 1990s when I graduated high school. I lived most of my adult life in chaos in one form or another: cultural, social, economic, moral, political. And I don't know what people like me and in my generation are going to do when there is a high, when there is a spring after we exit the cyclical historical winter. But we can't all be cranky about it. Nothing worse than a cranky old man in spring. And I've lived in the Northeast. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we got 14 inches of snow yesterday, by the way. So yeah, spring's gonna be fun. Anyway, go ahead.
It's gonna be a good time. Tom, what is the leadership pathway using wisdom? Because that is something that has been lamented. A lack of appreciation for it is something that has been lamented. But I think wisdom's about to have its day.
I feel like this question is probably the hardest one of the whole podcast, honestly, because like when you think about I think the bigger problem, honestly, is recognition of wisdom, right? Like I think because I think there's some lost in translation things that happen from generation to generation to generation, and I think that we are in one of the biggest gaps in history. And what I mean by that is, like, if you think of the Great Depression era generation, and then the World War II era, and then the baby boomer, like there was this like transfer of wisdom and confidence that kind of went with them, right until about our generation. So like the generation before us, they're like, okay, we're pretty confident you guys got this. We're not 100% sure, but we think we can survive whatever you guys end up doing. Our generation right now is looking at the 20-somethings going, we have no idea if we're going to survive them. And part of the reason we don't think, part of the reason we don't know if we're going to survive them is because we're not convinced in our ability to transfer our confidence of wisdom and integrity to them.
I think we don't even think we have any wisdom to transfer, which is even worse.
Maybe not, maybe as a collective, but I if I am speaking strictly from myself in our family unit, I look at what my elder, my my mentor and the person that I would have put the world on passed away 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The information, he passed away feeling confident that what he taught me is going to be taught to the next generation.
Okay.
Right? Like, he died feeling confident that I was going to do what I was supposed to do. I am now in turn trying to push that knowledge and wisdom. And I don't know, I'm banging my head against the wall trying to figure out how to get them to see that. So to your point, like, I think part of it is they don't view me the same way they viewed him.
Mm-hmm.
So even though he felt he did a good job teaching me to the point I now have the ability to teach the next generation, they don't know if I have the capability. So to your point, it's not that we don't have the wisdom, it's just that they don't have the confidence in us that we're going to be able to transfer that wisdom to them. So it's a bizarre psychological twist, I know, but I don't think I think the onus is on us, not because we don't have the wisdom. I just don't think we know how to transfer it. I don't know if we know how to present it. I don't know if we know. We're not giving them reason or cause to believe in our wisdom and or our ability to give it to them and to push it down and give. That's where I think the disconnect is, and I think it's the biggest gap we've seen ever in that.
So part of it is that I was born in 1979, so I'm on the tail end of the Gen X generation. I'm in that weird middle ground between Gen X and millennials.
Well, I was born in 74, so I feel 74. The same way, by the way. I think you and I are closer to thinking and whatever than I am to other Gen Xers.
Yeah, like, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, because the Gen X generation, I mean, 64 to 80, right. In general, in demographics is, I mean, that's, but the number of people inside of that generation. So part of this is also scale. That's actually one of the smallest generations in American history. There were only, I think, 12 million people in that generation or 20 million people in that generation. It was hilarious. It was small. It was tiny, right? In comparison to, what is it, 60, 70 million baby boomers, who are all our parents. And then our if we came from large families, which I did, our younger brothers and sisters were millennials, and in some cases Gen Z, but mostly millennials. And the millennial generation runs from 84 to 97. And there's 90 million of them. 90 million. So part of it is, if your generation is literally 4x less than than either 3x less and 4x less than either generation on either side of you, your best move is just to kind of hang out. Because what are you going to do?
But that's not in our nature. We are. Think about this for a second. The generation that you're talking about is one of the smallest. Is probably the most innovative, the most competitive, the most, like, we check all the boxes that neither of the other two aside of us want to check.
Right.
Like, honestly, if you think
you're correct. No, you're correct. And so,
like, so the Gen Zs of the world, everyone gets a trophy. There's no competitiveness there. There's no win and lose or die. Like, there's like can we just, like, everyone's like a happy and like, so anyway, I don't know. We are not the generation that's going to just stand idly by and just watch what happens. I could tell you that.
No. But this is why I say it's hard to be. So our generation came up, and this is why I mentioned I spent the first 20 years of my adult life, from 20 to 40, and I'm 44 now, in chaos. Like, there is September 11th literally happened the year I turned 21.
Yeah.
Like 3 weeks afterward was my birthday. Like, yeah, happy birthday. Here we go. Off to the races now. So from that historical moment, from that historical perspective, the thing that binds all of us together is that sense of survival through chaos. But what we tend to do as a result of that, and again, I'm getting a lot of these ideas from the book, The Fourth Turning. I would strongly recommend you read that. William Strauss and Neil Howe, great book. You can pick it up on audiobook. We're going to be covering that book actually on the podcast in February, I believe, either February or late January with our other guest host Brian Bagley. So you should listen to that episode. It's going to be a great bonus episode. We're actually going to break apart this book and get into some of these ideas because they have influenced how I think about this now, and how I think about the books and what we're doing on the podcast too. So we've been defined by chaos, and this is why I said people who have been defined by chaos tend to be survivalists. Well, survivalists, when everything switches over and everybody is clapping and getting it, those guys are out in the back smoking a cigarette, grumbling about the kids. and the wisdom that we do have, you're correct. Your sense, your psychological sense is correct. Your instincts are correct. Our wisdom is not valued. And that's something that Strauss and Howe talk about, where like the nomad generation, which is what they call Gen Xers, the nomad generation, and this is not unusual throughout cycles in American history. There's been about 4 cycles of nomads throughout American history. And usually when they are in middle age and elderly, and the next generation is coming into a high and then into an awakening, their wisdom is basically chucked out the door. And I don't see why it would be any different for us, which is why I think it is more incumbent upon us as a generation and as individuals, to your point, to actually press the case for wisdom, to actually press the case for, to Plato, to Socrates' point, temperance, to actually press the case for, you talked about conscious capitalism, ethics and virtue, to press this case as strongly as we possibly can, because my concern is that too many of us will sort of throw up our hands and let it go, because you just run out of energy at a certain point. Like, along a timeline, you're just like, I just want to be done. But that's not helpful for people, to your point, who need that wisdom transfer. And by the way, the baby boomers aren't doing a good job of wisdom transfer anyway, because we've got an entire generation of people who literally had to have power. I mean, we have an 80-year-old Joe Biden who literally had to have power yanked away from them, from their dying hands. This is not good. This is not good. And so the path through leadership, through wisdom, I think, well, I think it's going to be 20 years before we figure out, before all the bets are in, before everything is, but I think we better be working for that 20 years. We better be laying the foundation. We better be saying the things, we better be offering the solutions. We better be leading on them with the wisdom we do have.
I think it kind of goes back to, I mean, it kind of goes back to something you said earlier too, about like we've gone away from building character and built like certain things that drove people to do, like we don't hear anybody talking about integrity anymore. We don't hear anybody talking about character, which, by the way, just so you all know, in my house, topic of conversation at least once a month. Do you have integrity in what you like? That's a big thing for us. Like, it's a very big deal for us. What is the measure of your character? How do you know you're being a good person or a bad person? Like, we talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think families have those conversations anymore.
Yeah.
I just think that they make assumptions based on your actions instead of having you talk through why you did a certain thing, why you acted a certain way, how you felt that action or that inaction is going to impact the rest of your family. Like, and by the way, again, I think it goes back to a cultural thing. Like we live, breathe, eat, sleep, drink our culture. Like, our culture is important to us. So we don't care what the US government is doing when it comes to our internal workings of our family. Like, we don't care what the worldview is, if like when it comes to the, but I think because of the internal workings of our family, it impacts us all outside of when we're outside of our family. Like, and I know I lay my head at night every day knowing that when my kids are outside doing their thing, that they're good people. Like, I know they are, because we talk, like, those are the kind of things we talk about. What, I just a simple, something so stupid, simple. People are going to think this is the most the dumbest thing to dwell on, but I'm telling you, it matters. When my son, who still lives at home, my youngest son, when he calls out sick at work and I see him in the kitchen, I go, why aren't you at work? I didn't feel good. What do you mean you didn't feel good? Did you feel good? Not good enough to go to work? Like, how, what do you mean? You're like, well, I woke up with a runny nose, stuffy fever, head, cough, blah, blah, blah. I thought going to work, I didn't want to get anybody else sick. I don't know if it's COVID or not. Great. I understand. Go back to bed. Have a good day. Like, I get that. But if he's like, oh, I just didn't feel like it, that is not a reason to call in sick, my friend. That is not an integrity, like, that is not an integral part of society. That's not what you do. There are other people that work where you work that rely on you to do a certain amount of work and do it a certain job, that if you don't show up, they have to now do more work. Then that's not right. Like, that's so, again, like, so now I go back to that, like, our family unit is more important to me than the global, right? Like,
Yeah.
that goes back to that. And I think that there's not enough of that kind of stuff that happens on a regular basis. That that could potentially influence what you're talking about tenfold, versus you and I trying to influence the next generation of workers that we barely
Right.
know, right?
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
there's a lot of that goes anyway.
I think there are those I think those conversations are happening. I think you should take heart. I think those conversations are happening, but I think they are happening in families, to your point, that are away from the dominant cultural and media centers. And by away,
Okay.
you can mean physically away, you can mean psychologically away,
Sure. Sure.
you can mean technologically away, whatever, right? So, I think about it, I mean, I know Jewish communities in the United States where they have Sabbath. I mean, they celebrate Sabbath religiously, and that is a
Yeah.
time for families to get together and talk about character and integrity and how this relates to right. Um, I know homeschooling families who, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, who pulled their kids out of school. People who pulled their kids out of school because of COVID. Matter of fact, I'm thinking of a guy right up the street, not particularly religious, just pulled his kids out of school because of COVID. And him and his wife are now building community in their family around these ideas of, to your point, integrity and character and wisdom and temperament. And they're having those conversations in one-on-one conversations, and in one-on-one interactions over Sunday dinners, over Saturday dinners, over weeknights dinners. So these things are happening in subcultures, I think, of the larger society in the United States. But I don't think, to your point, I don't think the revolution is being televised. The revolution isn't even showing up on TikTok.
More importantly, it's like, again, so why it's important to me, I'm gonna put this right into business for you, into a
Sure.
business sense. I had
Yeah.
a client recently, talking about his sales manager who, so I'm doing some sales and marketing, consulting and coaching for this company. I'm talking to the owner of the company. It's about $5 or $6, $8 million a year, somewhere around there. And he has a sales manager. Now, during the weekend, a bunch of calls came in, and on that Monday, he asked the sales manager why didn't you call the customers back? And he's like, well, because it was the weekend. I was away with my family. He goes, that doesn't fly with us. You're a salaried employee. Your responsibility is to take care of customers, take care of blah, 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 whatever. And the sales manager said, well, if I do that and I'm on my time with my family, I'm going to take a couple of hours off during the week and either leave early or come in late so that I can make up that time with the family. And the boss, the owner of the company, was a little offended by this. Now, here's the catch. So I called him on the carpet for it. And I said, why are you offended by this? Why is this bothering you? You project out family's important. You're part of our family now. You're treated like family. We want you to, like, so he's using your company culture to ask you or to tell you that that's what his expectation is, and you're crapping on it. You're that there's zero integrity in that. You're crapping on your own statements. And to his credit, he went, "Oh damn, that did not click to me, because I was thinking about, like, service to the customer and going beyond, like, you seeing our customers, like the whole slew of us, as one family, so they deserve your time and attention." As if, and he goes, didn't even click to me. So, but again, like to your point about leadership, like this is a guy who leads a company of, I don't know, it's like 25 employees. And he didn't even see it. He didn't see it. He didn't see the problem with it. So to your point about wisdom, how can you invoke wisdom if he's not seeing it himself? Right?
Right.
Like, so you need outside counsel. You need people, you need people to keep you honest, to call you on the carpet, to show you, like, you need, because that's what the family unit is doing with each other, right?
Right.
They're talking to each other about this stuff. Companies don't have that. Company leaders, who do you have to do that with? You don't have, like,
You
that's
know, who back checks you, right?
right.
Who's going to do that? Who's going to call you to the
You
carpet,
need
right?
somebody trusted. You need a trusted person. You need your Steve Jobs needs his Wozniak. Like
Yeah.
like
You need
that's
somebody.
so if you're trying to run a company by yourself, then you need a business coach. You need some sort of outside person you can bounce ideas off. I don't care what you pay that person. If you don't think you need them, you are wrong.
Yep. I'd agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. I would absolutely agree with that. I would hold to that. Well, Tom, I think we're about done here. I had another beat in here, but you know what? We went long in the second segment, and we shortened up a little bit on this third one. Plus, I got to be cognizant of your time. Plus, the last piece, we were just going to talk about politics. We've got all year to talk about that. So
Yes, we do.
no need to rush on that. Oh my, oh my. How could leaders stay on the path? By reading Plato's. How can we use this book, The Republic of Plato? How can we use the words of Socrates to think more critically, to develop more character, to think about our virtues as leaders? What can we take from this book today?
Well, I think we could take a lot from it, honestly. But the one thing that I'd like to probably leave you with is this. I go back to our first segment when I was talking about when he was trying to get people to define justice, right? And
Yes.
every time he got a definition of justice, he poked a hole in it.
Yep.
So for leaders, I go back to that and say, anytime you are in a problem-solving scenario and somebody gives you a solution to that problem, try your damnedest to poke all the holes in it you can to get to the point where you don't have any holes left to plug. You'll know the right answer, right? So you can view Socrates's methods as a way of kind of vetting out your own way of thinking when it comes to your problem solving in your company. And again, it doesn't matter what you're trying to solve, whether it's a sales and marketing problem, a leadership problem, or operations problem. It just, I would say, the philosophical points that he makes in there are very valid, even in today's world. Just constantly trying to poke those holes. I think that to me is how I'd leave this.
I would add to that only by poking those holes in the problem. We're not giving the problem power. We're actually
Oh no,
taking power away from the problem, and we are giving power to the solution.
yeah.
So I think of when the Navy SEALs, kind of notorious for this, after they have a mission that they go on, and they come back and they break that mission down. And from what I've heard, and anyone who is either knows more about this than I do or is a Navy SEAL themselves can correct me on this. I welcome feedback and checking on this. But what I've heard is that no SEAL who was on the mission, whether it went well or badly, doesn't matter. No SEAL who was on the mission gets to come to the breakdown of the mission with more problems. You could only come with solutions. What are we going to do next? How are we going to fix this? What do you propose? What is an idea? Look, sometimes this idea will get pushback of coming to your boss, not with complaints, but with solutions. I've seen this get pushback on LinkedIn before. And the pushback typically comes in the form of, well, people don't come to you with complaints, you never hear them, and then they're paralyzed because they don't actually know what the solution is. And so it's a cul-de-sac of escapism that allows you to think that everything is correct as a leader when in reality it's not. And then the problem gets to be big enough and then finally it blows up your company. I don't buy that. And I don't buy it because I didn't run and I don't run my company that way. And I did have 25 people at one point, and I did have a lot of people bringing me a lot of problems. And we took a Socratic approach to solving many of those problems. And by the way, the Socratic approach also involved accountability on the part of the person poking holes in the problem.
Yes.
For executing on the solution, which we cannot also dismiss. And Socrates placed the responsibility, and this is fundamentally why they charged him with the crime of disrupting the youth. He placed the responsibility for solving the problems of Greek society on the shoulders of the people who could actually solve the problems of Greek society.
Yeah.
Socrates' great problem or great challenge to the state was the idea that accountability existed on the shoulders of the individual, not the state. To Tom's point, you want to have integrity and character and wisdom in the world? You want to have it in the state? You want to have it in your elected leaders? All of it starts in your own house around your own dinner table.
For sure.
That's where all of it begins. Well, I'll close there. Thanks for coming on the podcast today, Tom.
Always my pleasure.
And well, that's it for us. Thank you for listening and subscribing to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. If you're listening to this on any of the major podcast players, like iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, please go ahead and leave us a 5-star review and write a little bit in there. A couple of sentences is good enough. That actually helps us game those algorithms that I was just maybe addressing. And, of course, it helps us grow the show. Tell all your family, tell all your friends, and tell the leaders in your life that you know that need to be listening to this show that this show exists. By the way, if you want to get started on the leadership path yourself, or you know some people who need to go on the leadership path, HSCT Publishing, the home company of Leadership Toolbox and Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, can help you and your team do that. So check out our training webinars, coaching services, and more at leadershiptoolbox.us. We are remote, we're live, we're in person, we're on video, and we've got leadership development solutions for your civic group, nonprofit staff, public sector staff, or even your private sector leaders. And of course, you're going to want to check out our video-based subscription service at leadingkeys.com. That's leadingkeys.com for leadership development on demand. You don't like videos, you don't like training, but you really like the podcast? Well, I would also recommend reading a book. Matter of fact, I'd recommend reading my most recent book, 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. You can get that in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Ingram Spark, and any other place that you order books online. Finally, of course, we're on YouTube just like everybody else is. We'd love to have you help us grow the YouTube channel, so like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the HSCT Publishing channel on YouTube. Just search for HSCT Publishing, or you can search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button. Subscribing helps us grow the show, as it does with the audio, just is the same with the video. All right, that's it for me.